Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. I've been digging through some absolutely fascinating material lately on the architecture of male behavior, and I am so excited for us to explore this together today. We're going to take a deeply empathetic but rigorously analytical deep dive into the roots of why men act the way they do. And more importantly, we're going to look at the actual framework for genuine redemption and transformation. We are moving way past those surface-level stereotypes to figure out the evolutionary, social, and psychological forces that truly shape the male psyche. To really unpack all of this, we have to start our analysis by posing a profound, kind of difficult central question. How can a man who is deeply set in his bad ways actually be rescued? When we say set in his bad ways, we're talking about a guy whose habits are ultimately just protecting a wound. He's running on autopilot. He's repeating what feels familiar, even if it's incredibly harmful to himself and the people around him. Often, he doesn't even believe change is possible, and he's just totally isolated inside his own mind. So what actually breaks through that kind of armor? Let's see what the research tells us and solve this psychological puzzle together. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Evolutionary roots and social scripts. 2. The crisis of the mask. 3. The architecture of rescue. 4. Identity anchoring and goodness shifts. And 5. The path to authentic agency. Starting right off with Section 1, Evolutionary Roots and Social Scripts Sculpting the Male Psyche. To truly understand male behavior without just falling into the trap of moral shame, we first have to look backward, like far backward, to the ancestral pressures of natural selection. The foundation of this begins with what's called parental investment theory. Basically, because women were burdened with a much higher biological investment per offspring, they naturally evolved towards selectivity. Men, on the other hand, evolved toward quantity and competition. Natural selection ruthlessly favored males who competed, took risks, and dominated resources, which, let's be honest, probably explains a lot about the behavior you might see at your local gym or in a corporate boardroom today. In fact, early ethologists proposed this idea of a hydraulic model of aggression. They suggested that aggressive energy builds up in men almost like steam in a pressure cooker, just constantly demanding a release valve. MRI evidence even shows structural differences in limbic regions, like the amygdala, which are linked to a higher baseline of aggression. But, and this is a vital distinction we have to keep in mind, biology sets a range of possibilities, not a destiny. The brain that can be hijacked by impulse is literally the exact same brain capable of extraordinary self-awareness. So while biology provides the raw material, it is culture that really does the sculpting. For centuries, our culture treated masculinity as this invisible human default, and it constructed a very specific, incredibly rigid norm around it. Think about the men in your own life as we go through these social scripts. How many of them operate under the big wheel syndrome? That's where their entire sense of self-worth is tied exclusively to their paycheck, their rank, and their visible power. If they don't have those things, they feel completely invisible. Then there's the homosocial struggle, where male identity is forged not through genuine intimacy, but through hierarchy and constant rivalry with other guys. But perhaps the most destructive one is the no sissy clause. This is that intense mandate from early boyhood to rigorously purge anything perceived as feminine or soft. This enforces rigid conformity through immense shame, and it leads directly to restricted emotionality, where vulnerability is completely suppressed across a man's entire lifetime. And that cultural suppression leads us directly to this concept, normative alexithymia. This is a widespread inability to identify or describe one's own emotional states, and the research in our source material suggests this actually affects up to 40% of men. Imagine feeling this complex, swirling mix of betrayal, disappointment, and sadness, but the only word you were ever taught to express all of that was angry. These men do not lack feelings. They lack the training. They struggle to name what they are experiencing in real time simply because no one ever sat them down and taught them the vocabulary for it. Their emotional articulation has been fundamentally crippled by the social scripts they were handed the second they were born. Moving on to Section 2, the crisis of the mask, the cost of invulnerability. The performance of this traditional archetype, it isn't free, and the statistical toll is incredibly sobering. Just let this sink in for a moment. Men die, on average, 7 years earlier than women. 7 years. And this isn't just some biological quirk. This earlier death rate is largely driven by the exact social conditioning we were just discussing. It comes from high levels of culturally encouraged risk-taking, chronic unaddressed stress, and fiercely suppressed health-seeking behavior. The mask they wear, quite literally, shortens their lives. Furthermore, men account for over 70% of suicide deaths globally,
That staggering, heartbreaking statistic is directly tied to those masculine norms that aggressively prohibit asking for help. The mandate for total self-reliance gets pushed to a catastrophic extreme, leaving many men with absolutely no emotional support network when they need it the most.
We also see this massive cost in the cycle of violence. Because of that normative alexithymia we just talked about, the processing of trauma is severely restricted. Because of this, men who have been victims of violence are actually 3 times more likely to become perpetrators themselves. The cycle of harm begins with harm. And because the cultural tools for healing are just withheld from them, the cycle simply continues unless a deliberate, targeted intervention occurs. So, how do men cope with all this pressure? Usually through 2 internal mechanisms that, unfortunately, end up sabotaging genuine relational partnership. First, there's the emotional funnel. Because anger is basically the only publicly permitted emotion for traditional men, all those vulnerable feelings, grief, fear, loneliness, shame, they're all funneled inward and forcefully converted into rage, or sometimes just total numbness. Second, we have the cave, and I think we've all seen the cave in action. When a partner brings up an emotional issue, the male brain, which has been socialized to be Mr. Fix-It, frantically searches for a logical tool or a rapid solution. When he can't find one, profound frustration arises, and he retreats. He isolates and withdraws from the connection. It feels like a safe space to him, but to his partner, it feels like total abandonment. And very quickly, that cave turns into a psychological prison. Which brings us to Section 3, the architecture of rescue, penetrating the armor. If a man is trapped in that cave, just running on autopilot, what actually reaches him? The real rescue comes from 3 specific forces that can penetrate a hardened pattern. First, relationship. And I don't mean nagging or fixing. I mean real connection, whether that's romantic, brotherly, or spiritual, where a man feels truly seen and not judged. A man will rise to meet someone who genuinely believes he can rise. Second, consequences. This isn't about punishment. It's about facing undeniable reality. It's a natural boundary, like a partner moving into the guest room until counseling starts. Facing the real cost of his actions creates the crack where light can finally enter. And third, identity shift. A man truly changes when he stops seeing himself as a bad man who does bad things and starts seeing himself as a protector or a builder. Because at the end of the day, identity is infinitely stronger than habit. Now we have to be crystal clear about what works and, honestly, just as importantly, what spectacularly backfires. Genuine rescue involves offering connection without enabling him. It means letting consequences naturally teach, gently showing him his impact without layering on shame, and supporting small wins to build up his momentum. On the flip side, what hardens those bad ways? Nagging, moral superiority, ultimatums, trying to fix him like he's a project, or unhealthy self-sacrifice. Shame literally locks bad behavior in place. Acceptance is what loosens its grip. All right, Section 4, identity anchoring and goodness shifts. This is where we look at how change actually takes root, and this brilliantly illustrates what's going on beneath the surface. Every man, whether successful or unsuccessful in his transformation, experiences moments where he chooses authentic goodness, like choosing responsibility, or softening toward loved ones, or rejecting cruelty. Successful men repeat that shift until it becomes a habit. Unsuccessful men just experience it as a fleeting moment. Successful men use honesty as a tool for continuous growth. Unsuccessful men use it just for a quick emotional release. But here is the non-obvious insight, the absolute core difference I found in this material. It's identity anchoring. Successful men anchor their identity directly to the goodness shift. They say, I am the kind of man who does this. Unsuccessful men anchor their identity to external circumstances. They say, I do this when life lets me. That single difference dictates a lifetime of behavioral divergence. Because identity anchoring is so profoundly crucial, you can't just demand behavioral compliance from a man, you have to give him a role to rise into. These 5 roles act as psychological levers that bypass his resistance because they speak directly to his hidden strengths. The protector, and this isn't just about physical safety, it gives him deep purpose through safeguarding others' well-being. The builder channels his restless energy into creating rather than destroying. The guide makes him directly responsible for someone else's growth. The warrior reframes his internal struggle as a noble battle actually worth fighting. And the shepherd gives him a community to care for. Guys don't change because they are told to. They change because they're summoned into a higher identity. So let's look at how this builds into an actionable, step-by-step method for summoning that identity in the relationships around you. First, you name the hidden strength you see in him, no matter how small. That creates the seed of the role. Second, you connect that strength to a calling or responsibility. Not as a demand, mind you, but as an opportunity. Third, show him the positive impact of stepping into this role, making it deeply meaningful. Fourth, give him a first small, manageable mission to build some early momentum. And fifth, acknowledge progress, not perfection. This locks that new identity in place. Men grow through recognition, you guys, not pressure.
And that brings us to our final phase, Section 5, the path to authentic agency. For a really long time, masculine purpose, that drive to have direction, responsibility, and to build something that lasts, and relational partnership were treated as total opposites. But the core takeaway from our source material is that masculine purpose actually becomes stronger, not weaker, when it's expressed through partnership. Partnership is not submission, it is shared power. Purpose gives partnership structure and direction, while partnership gives purpose depth, adaptability, and someone actually worth protecting. Together, they create clarity and connection, which is really the highest form of genuine power.
This is a massive, fundamental shift in how we view power. The old model was power over, dominance used purely as a compensatory mechanism. When a guy operates from a fear of failure and internal shame, he seeks dominance just to hide his terror of inadequacy. It is a wildly fragile armor. But the authentic agency shift moves toward partnership with. This is where a man chooses conscious responses over his biological impulses. He seeks mutual flourishing, embraces shared responsibility, and starts seeing emotional awareness not as some sort of weakness, but as an ultimate strength. By doing this, he actually expands his masculinity, rather than erasing it.
Ultimately, the exceptional man is not born different. He chooses to become different. Reclaiming masculinity as a flexible, empathetic construct that holds both immense strength and deep tenderness is its fullest expression. The source text leaves us with this incredible thought. The most radical act a man can perform in a culture of masculine performance is simply to tell the truth about his interior life. Owning your vulnerability isn't a confession of weakness. It is the absolute ultimate reclamation of your full humanity. It is what makes a man whole. So I want to leave you with this question to consider today. In a world that is constantly demanding performance, what is one truth you can tell about your own interior life right now? Thank you so much for joining me on this deeply important explainer today. Keep analyzing, keep asking those big questions, and I will see you next time.